No,
Okay,
sir.
perfect.
You can carry on, sir. It's audible and video also. Yes.
Perfect, sir. Yeah. Thank you. So, our today's agenda for discussion with respect to the given topic, I have divided into certain categories. Our main focus is going to be import of services. But since we are very closely connected with import of goods also, or rather I feel that we are more well-versed with the provisions of import of goods, I've tried to make a comparative study of both the provisions. Basically, our main focus is on the import of services part, but it will be vis-a-vis import of goods. Within import of service, we are going to see the levy, how levy is created on import of services. Then the most critical and the most problem creating point, the place of supply provisions. And obviously the most important point, once we understand the levy in place of supply, the RCM, which is there on imported services. Now, before I start with my deliberation, I always, since I am a bit more inclined towards spirituality and our culture, I try to link things with whatever I get to know in our culture. And in our culture, we have a beautiful concept of Tridev. Now, besides our culture, we have coined the concept of, we feel that by God, they are referring to a name, but actually God is not a name. God is an abbreviation of three different words. It is God. And the concept of God, I'm using the word concept because it is a concept which is coined following our philosophy of Tridev. God is not a name, God is not a term, it is an abbreviation. It is an abbreviation for G stands for generator, who is Brahma in our tradition. O stands for organizer, who is Vishnu, and D stands for destroyer, who is Shiva. So we have the same philosophy, and the Western culture has simply adopted our philosophy and coined the term God. Now, the same concept of Trideva, I have tried to link it with our concept of taxation. Let us see how. In taxation, we are implementing the law which is created by the Brahma of taxation, which is the parliament, who is the lawmaker. Then comes Vishnu, that is we, the consultants, who are responsible for executing this law. So our role is similar to that of Vishnu, and also the role of department officials. So from the government side, it is the department officials. From the client side, it is we who play the role of Vishnu in taxation. And then comes the role of Shiva, the Mahesha. This is played by judiciary, whose role is to interpret wherever required, strike down if something is not constitutionally correct or something is not within the parameters of law. So if you can connect, you'll find that the concept of Trideva in our culture is also equally applicable in taxation. Now let us move on to our topic in particular. Now, before I go to my subject in particular, that is imported services, I would like to draw your kind attention to the overall GST. Now, since GST law is still in a very infancy stage, it is still in the stage of development, still in the stage of rectification, redevelopment, I always believe that as a consultant, many times we jump directly to the second step, that is assessment. But I personally have followed this particular sequence, which I have given in the form of synopsis. In fact, our today's discussion will also go ahead in the same sequence so that our application of law, our understanding of law should never be wrong. So whenever you are handling any situation or case, my dear request to all of you members is please try to follow this sequence, and I'm sure in more than 90-95% cases, your understanding, your interpretation of law would be perfect. Now, the first thing is levy. As I said, we generally jump to the second stage, that is the assessment. We directly go to computing how much tax we have to pay. But before that, we have to check whether levy is created. And in my today's discussion on imported services, the main focus, the main stress is on this concept of levy itself, because I have seen in many cases, we end up paying tax under RCM. We ask our client to pay tax under RCM. During the time of audit, we put an audit observation that RCM has not been paid on imported services, especially like Chairman Sir had pointed out to me, issues relating to intermediary, issues relating to GTA. But many times I have seen that we are in the first place not required to pay any tax. There is no question of RCM. Why we are not required to pay any tax? Because no levy is created. So let us first see how you have to proceed with application of law to any given situation. First, check whether there is levy. Within levy, you have to check whether there is supply. Then you have to check there should be supply of what? Of goods or services. So supply is the taxable event and goods and services are the taxable object. Our today's discussion will start with supply only, whether there is supply or when there is supply in case of import of services. Then comes the next point, again, which will be our today's focus, because the levy is created only after you cross this barrier, that is place of supply. Generally, in normal cases, that is in case of domestic transactions, the place of supply plays the role of deciding whether the tax would be CS or whether it would be I. But in case of import of services, this concept of place of supply would play a very important role in deciding whether in the first place there is any levy and whether are we required to pay tax under RCM. Then comes exemption. Many times there is supply, there is goods and service, so a charge is created. However, presently you need not discharge any tax liability because your case may be covered under one of the entries of the exemption notification. Now, once you cross these three barriers or you cross these stages, they finally create a taxable levy on your client. Then comes the next part. Then you have to decide on the amount that has to be paid. For this, the step is assessment. In assessment, we have to first decide who will be paying. Whether it is the supplier who is paying, then it will be forward charge. Whether it is the recipient who is paying, then it will be reverse charge. And in GST law, we have another possibility, that is a special charge where a third person other than the supplier and other than the recipient, a third person is going to pay. That is what is called as electronic commerce operator in few notified cases. So first decide who is liable to pay. Now once your client is liable to pay because of reverse charge mechanism or forward charge mechanism, then comes the second important step, when you are liable to pay. See, when we discuss about levy is only creating a charge that okay, your transaction is liable to tax. But when exactly this charge is created, like I'll give you a simple example. In case of income tax law, we are earning income every moment. Every day we are entering into some income earning transaction, but there is no charge or there is no liability to pay because the liability is triggered directly in the next year, which we term as the assessment year. Similarly, in GST law also, if you have entered into some taxable transaction today, it is not necessary that the levy is created today itself, the charge is created today itself, and also the liability is created today itself. So it is very important to decide when the liability triggers. This is what is termed as time of supply. Once you have decided that okay, liability has triggered in this month, so I need to discharge the tax liability in this month. Now we go to the computation aspect where we first find out at what rate, which is termed as classification, then on what value, which is covered under valuation, and then after all these stages, we compute our output tax. However, you need not pay the entire output tax because we have an important concept in GST law on the basis of value addition tax, that is the input tax credit. So we have to also decide how much of input tax is eligible. And after deducting that input tax from our output liability, we get to know the final amount that we need to pay. Then comes the compliance part where you need to maintain all types of records. And most importantly, monthly or quarterly, we need to discharge our tax and also file the returns. Besides monthly, quarterly, periodical returns, there is again a responsibility of filing annual returns. So I personally believe that whenever you are handling any situation, especially a new client joins, then I think we should always follow this. Or whenever a case comes to you, maybe for opinion or maybe some litigation has come to you, even though they have directly levied penalty and interest, you need not directly be worried about the penalty aspect. Let us first focus on whether there was a charge in the first place. Because many times I have seen, especially in case of import of services, there is no charge in the first place. And once there is no charge, there is no question of tax and penalty and interest. Whenever I am consulted by different members relating to their clients' issues, they ask me for giving my opinion. Then I always start with this, and especially in case of import of services, you will find that we win the case at the first stage itself. Now, let us understand this in detail. So we start with our import provisions. Now, in import provisions, we start with the definition, and as I had said, we'll try to make it comparative between goods and services. Now, dear members, I would like to draw your attention to the comparison between the definition of import of goods and import of services both given under the GST law. Now, the definition, the concept of import of goods has been borrowed, has been taken from obviously the customs law, and it is copy paste what we have dealt with in customs. Now, let us see what this particular concept says. Now, as per this definition, one second, let me just minimize this tab. Acha, also, sir, if there is any questions, please, you all feel free to ask. Sir, what is the method in which tab members can put their questions? Chairman, sir?
Sir, we have a chart, sir, here.
Okay.
Chart members will be putting questions. At the
Perfect.
end of the session, we will answer, sir.
Acha, so we need
At
not.
the end of the session, some new members will unmute and ask questions. At the
Acha,
end
so
of the
I
session,
need not
members
I
can
need not
unmute
do
and
it in
ask.
between.
Yes, yes, sir. No need, sir.
Okay, sir, fine. So I'll only see the chat box at the end then. Fine. Now, dear members, let us understand. Let's focus.
We can,
Yes, sir.
sorry. We can complete by 6:45 and we can share for 15 minutes for you.
Perfect, sir. Will do, sir. Now, dear members, if you observe the definition of import of goods, you will nowhere find the term supply. Now, this is interesting to note that for creating a charge of GST on import of goods, you need not apply the concept of supply over here. Why? One, you see the definition. Second, when we see the charging section, that is section 5 of the IGST law, over there also, they have very specifically mentioned, if somebody of you remember, I have covered it in the latter part of my slide, that the law says that the levy, the calculation, the valuation, everything would be as per the customs law, including levy. So the first major difference between import of goods and import of service is that for the purpose of creating the charge in the first place itself, there is no need of there being a supply in case of import of goods. But now let us see the definition of import of service. Now, when you see the definition of import of service, you will find that it starts with this word. Import of service means supply of any service. So by default, for creating a charge on import of service, now you have to go back to section 7 of the CGST Act, read with schedule 1, 2 and 3, and then you can decide whether there will be a charge. So first major point of difference between import of goods and services, for import of goods, there being a supply is not a criterion. Secondly, the levy is as per the customs law, not as per the GST law. But in case of services, it is totally as per the GST law. So the first requirement is there should be supply. Now, the second requirement, the supplier should be located outside. Third requirement, the recipient should be located inside. Now, till this point, we are okay. And this is where I think we create a mistake because we forget the next condition. Most important condition. So for creating a charge on import of service, first check whether there is supply. Second, the supplier should be outside India. Third, the recipient should be inside India. And fourth, most important criteria, the place of supply for this transaction should fall within India. And in many cases, like in case of intermediary and so many other cases, we find that there is no levy in the first place itself. So there is no question of RCM because of the fourth condition. Also here I would like to point one major point of difference between import of service and export of service. In the definition of export of service, which I have not covered over here, the requirement is that there should be a flow of foreign exchange in India. So there is one more condition in the definition of export of service, that the payment should have been received in convertible foreign exchange. However, there is no such requirement in the definition of import of service that the payment should be made in foreign exchange. So this is again an important point to be understood, that for there being import of service, there is no requirement, no criterion relating to foreign exchange payment. Now, see the definition. So there has to be a supply. Location of supplier is outside. Location of recipient is inside. And the place of supply is within India. Now we go ahead with the definition of India first. Now, what is India? We all know this definition. We have studied in different laws, and it is very similar. It is the territory of India as defined in Article 1 of the Constitution, which includes the territorial water, the seabed, subsoil, the continental shelf, etc., and the airspace above this territorial water. So, broadly, the land mass, the 12 nautical miles of area within the sea, the subsoil, the seabed, and the airspace. Fine. Now, in this whole slide, I want you all to just keep in mind that at the back of the mind the definition of import of service, because now my next few slides would be analyzing only this one point, that whether there is import of service in the law in the first place. So now we are going to analyze the definition of import of service. So my first question is, when is import of service regarded as supply under GST? Because as I started with the definition, if you remember, the definition said that what is import of service? It is supply of service. So now we have to check when import of service will be a supply. For this, I would like to draw your attention to section 7 of the CGST law. If you remember the definition of supply, there were 4 clauses. Clause 71A, 71B, 71C, 71D. Later on, 71D got merged and it became another subsection. So today we have 71A, 71B, 71C. Now, if you remember 71A, the criteria given in section 71A, that supply means all forms of supply of good, service, or both by a person, and then comes the two most important requirement: for a consideration and in the course or furtherance of business. Now let us understand the concept of import of service and when there is a supply relating to import of service. Now in all the 3 clauses, 71A, 71B, 71C, we have some conditions relating to import of service. So I start with 71A. Now to fall under 71A, you have to satisfy all the requirements of 71A, the major requirement being that for your transaction there should be a consideration, and second, the transaction should be in the course or furtherance of business. So if this criterion is met, then your transaction classifies as a supply. Now let us take some practical examples. Now all my examples would be directed towards understanding the concept of import of service only. Now let us take, for example, I am a chartered accountant in India. I want to construct my office and I want to do some interior designing of my office. In this particular case, I hire an architect or an interior designer from Dubai, because I get a reference that in Dubai people have very lavish places. So I get a connect from one of my clients over there, and he suggests me a very good architect, interior designer from Dubai, and I hire him. Now let us analyze this transaction with respect to the requirement of section 7. Now for there being a supply, the requirement is there should be one of the forms of supply. So there is a form of supply. He is giving me his consultation. Second, there should be goods or service. Yes, the consultation is a service. Now whether I'm getting it free, no, I'm paying him $5,000. So there is a consideration. And fourth, this supply I have received in the course of my business. Now very important over here, members, is normally when we see the definition of supply, it is with respect to supplier. So whenever you check this condition of in the course or furtherance of business, it is checked with respect to supplier. However, when you are talking about import of service, since the import of service is leviable to tax under RCM, then when you are looking at this, analyzing this definition of in the course or furtherance of business, it has to be checked with respect to recipient. So as a recipient, as a chartered accountant recipient, I am receiving a service, and the service is for the purpose of or in the course or furtherance of my business in India. So I satisfy all the conditions of section 7(1)(a). So this is a supply of service, supply of consultancy services by a foreign consultant to an Indian recipient. So I also fit in all the requirements of the definition of import of service. We are yet to see place of supply rules. So keeping aside place of supply rules, firstly, I am fitting in the definition of supply. As per 7(1)(a), there is a supply. Also, the supplier is outside, the recipient is inside. So till this point, you can say that my services can qualify as import. Only have to satisfy one more condition, that is the place of supply should be in India, that we are going to check later. Then comes the second part. 7.1b is again a specific clause designed only to cover import of services. Now in this same example, I hire this interior designer from Dubai for doing interiors of my house. Now, let us say I've hired him for both services, for my office also and for my house also. For my office, there is a supply as per 7.1a. That matter is now settled. Now, when I'm hiring him for doing interiors of my house, whether this will be a supply or not, for this, we have to resort to 7.1b. Now, for fitting under the 7.1b condition, there has to be a consideration, but there is no requirement that it should be in the course or furtherance of the business of recipient. So I have mentioned in the remarks table that services imported may be even for personal use, and still it will be qualifying as a supply. Now, my this second example where I have hired him for doing interiors of my hello, is there a problem? I can hear some sound.
Unmuted, sir. We can continue, sir.
Okay, sir. Fine. So I was saying. Okay. So 7.1b. If I have hired this consultant, this interior designer for doing the interiors of my house, it is not satisfying 7.1a, but it is still a supply because of 7.1b. So for getting classified in 7.1b, the relaxation is that it may or may not be in the course of my business. So in this case, even though I'm availing this service for my personal use, still it will be import of service. And I would be liable to pay tax under RCM. Only we have to still check the definition of place of supply. For the time being, I'm just answering for simplicity that the place of supply is in India. So ultimately it is import. I have to pay tax. Then comes the third requirement, 7.1c. Now 7.1c clause says that in respect of those cases which are covered in Schedule 1, there is a supply even if there is no consideration. And in Schedule 1, you have different cases. We go to para 4 of Schedule 1. Now in para 4 of Schedule 1, again the reference is given to import of services. Now here, the relaxation is on the criteria of consideration. So for the purpose of 7.1c read with Schedule 1, now even if there is no consideration, that is, a service is received free, still it would fall under 7.1c. But now see the remarks column. For C, the other requirement has to be satisfied that it should be in the course or furtherance of business, and the remarks column is that I should have received this service from a related person. Now we have the definition of related person under the GST law under the explanation given under section 15. So it should be holding subsidiary, it should be firm and partner, it should be company and director. If any of these cases exist, then it will fall under 7.1c. So taking the same example, let us say this interior consultant, interior designer from Dubai is my friend. And I tell him ki, Shoaib bhai, I want to do interiors of my office. So I need your service. So he said, fine, Vishal bhai, I'll be doing it for you. And when I asked him, bhai, what is your consideration? He said, nahi bhai, this is just from my side since we are school friends. So from my side, I won't be charging you. Now in this particular case, I do not satisfy 7.1a because 7.1a requires consideration. Also, I do not satisfy 7.1b because that also requires consideration, but I still can get covered under 7.1c because 7.1c does not require consideration. Now here I am availing the service, I am getting the service free. So I will check 7.1c read with Schedule 1 para 4. Now here there is no consideration, but the second condition has to be satisfied. If I am availing his interior service for the designing of my house, there is no supply under any of the clauses. So it will be a non-taxable item. I repeat, in this example, if I am availing the service of interior designer from my friend who is not charging me consideration and I am doing this for interior designing of my house, there is no charge under 7.1a, 7.1b, 7.1c. Because under 7.1c, consideration is relaxed, but I have to satisfy the other requirement that it should be in the course or furtherance of my business. Now here, if I am availing this service of interior designing of my office from a friend who is not charging me any consideration, I fall under 7.1c, but still it will not be a supply. Why? Because the requirement for falling under 7.1c read with Schedule 1 Para 4 is that this service should be supplied to me by a related person or by one of my own establishments which is outside India. So let us say I have a branch office in Dubai, and that branch office is providing me some services and they are not charging me consideration, then it would be a supply under 7.1c. But here my friend is providing me a service, my friend neither fits in the definition of related person nor he is an establishment outside India. In this particular case, when I am getting consulting service from my friend and my friend is not a related person, then there is no supply, there is no GST leviability, there is no RCM. So dear members, let us first understand that for there being a charge, as I discussed in the slide of synopsis, firstly we have to check levy, and within levy we have to first check supply. So import of services, you have to first apply the parameters of section 7.1a, 7.1b, 7.1c. Where all conditions are satisfied, it is supply under 7.1a. Where it is a personal use service, it can still be a supply under 7.1b. And when it is a free service, it can still be a supply under 7.1c, provided I should receive the service from a related person or one of my own branch office or establishment which is outside India. If we understand these criterions, then only we have to go to the next leg of this. The next leg of this is that after I check that whether there is supply or not, now I have to check the location, because the definition requires that the location of supplier is outside, location of recipient is inside. Now, what is the definition of location of supplier? The similar definition is for recipient. It is verbatim same. So let us understand the definition of supplier, location of supplier, and the same would apply for location of recipient. Now there are 4 parts given in the definition of location of supplier. Now when you go through these definitions, dear members, remember, in case of import of service, supplier has to be outside India and he will never fit in the first case. What is the first case? What will be location of supplier? Where a supply is made from a place of business for which registration has been obtained. Then the location of supplier would be the location of such place of business. Now, in case of all import of service cases, always the supplier is a person who is outside India. Only then it can be import. And if the person is outside India, never it will happen that the person's place would be having a registration. When we are saying registration, registration means registration under the GST law of India. So for us, the location of supplier can never be as per the first part of this definition. Then we have to find out second, third, or fourth. Third is actually not applicable. It will be either second or fourth. Now what is second? Now the second says that where a supply is made from a place other than a place of business for which registration has been obtained. Like in our case, the supplier, see, the supplier may be a registered person, but he would be registered under some other laws of the country outside India. But we want registration under the GST law, which will never happen. So in our case, what would be the location of supplier? It would be the fixed establishment. Now, what is fixed establishment? That is what we are going to see in the next slide. In very simple words, it is the office of the supplier. It is the company of the supplier. It is the business place of the supplier. See, understand this, dear members. Your office, your business place is what is a fixed establishment. If it is registered, it falls in point 1. If it is not registered, it falls in point 2. So let us say out of all the members, whoever is below 20 lakhs and has not registered under GST, your office is a location of supplier under second point. Whoever are registered, then your office is a location of supplier under point 1. That is the difference. So for unregistered suppliers, it is point 2. For registered suppliers, the same office is location under point 1. Now point 3 is not applicable. It is applicable when there are multiple locations of supplier. Fine. Now comes third, that is the fourth point. So either it will be registered place, as I said, it will not happen in case of import of service. So it will be, as per the fourth point, it is the usual place of residence of the supplier. So either it is the office of the supplier, and if there is no office of the supplier, it would be the usual place of residence of the supplier. So understand this, for import of service, what would be the location of supplier? And importantly, this location has to be outside India, only then we will satisfy the definition of import. Now, what is a fixed establishment? A fixed establishment means a place, obviously other than a registered place, which is characterized by sufficient degree of permanence and a suitable structure in terms of human and technical resource. Now just understand this. Just apply this with your office. Your office is a place which is having or which is characterized by a sufficient degree of permanence. What do you mean by sufficient degree of permanence? It simply means that you intend to carry out your work from there on an ongoing basis. Permanent does not mean lifelong. It may be a rented place. Still, it will be characterized as having sufficient degree of permanence. Second, it is having a suitable structure. All of our offices having a suitable structure in terms of human resource. So we have employees working, we have staff working, we may have articles working, and also technical resource. We have our computer system, we have our server. So our office is a fixed establishment, and all this structure is either for making a supply or for receiving some inward supply. So all our offices, if not registered, will be termed as a fixed establishment, and that place will become the location of supply. Now the same copy paste definition is for location of recipient. In case of import of service, we are the recipient of service. So first point is also applicable, or second point is applicable, or fourth point is applicable. So if our recipient's office is registered office, then first point, that is the location of such place of business which is registered is the location of recipient. If my office is not registered office, then as per the second point, still my office is the location of recipient. And if I do not have an office, if I'm operating from home, then as per fourth point, my usual place of residence is the location of recipient. So we are satisfying the criteria given in the definition. So first we check whether there is supply. So in case of import, there can be supply as per 7.1a, 7.1b or 7.1c. And then second we check location of recipient, location of supplier. Now here, before I proceed, one very important point. What is, or rather who is a recipient? Under the GST law, there is a very clear-cut definition given of recipient. And if you all would remember the definition says who is a recipient in case of those supplies where there is a consideration. And normally 90% cases, we have a consideration. Where there is a consideration, the recipient is the person who is liable to pay. Now, dear members, please understand and pay attention to this, because many times, now let us keep aside import of service for a minute. I am now talking about domestic transactions, specifically of GTA service. In case of GTA, I have always come across this point. Vishal sir, are we liable to pay tax under RCM? Now here, my first question is whether you are a recipient. Now you will be saying, sir, I am availing the GTA service. Please understand, the person who is availing the service, the person who is receiving the service is a beneficiary of the service. He may or may not be a recipient of service. There is a difference between being a beneficiary of service and being a recipient of service. In GST, recipient has been very specifically defined as that person who is liable to pay for that service. He may or may not be actually receiving, consuming the service. Now, in respect of GTA, there are always two parties. See, one is a transporter, he is the supplier. Let us keep the supplier part aside. Within recipient, there are two parties, the consignor, the consignee. Now, who has hired the GTA? Means GTA would be raising invoice on whom? Whether the consignor or the consignee. Who would be liable to pay the freight to GTA? And how you decide who is liable to pay? The person in whose name the GTA would be raising its invoice. that person is the recipient. It may be the consignor, it may be the consignee. This is what is very important. And even in case of import of service, since we are going to face tax under RCM, please understand this, that who is the recipient, because until and unless you are the recipient, you may not be required to pay tax. And this is exactly what is the issue in Mohit Minerals relating to RCM on ocean freight. Unfortunately, there is no decision yet from the Supreme Court, but I'm very sure it would be in our favor, because when the goods are imported by us on CIF basis, there is the freight component which is already borne by the supplier. Who is the person who is liable to pay? The supplier. So there is no question of paying tax on inward freight in case of, that is, ocean freight, because we generally do not fall in the criteria of recipient. Also, the second reason is that the value is already included while deciding the value of import of goods. But before that, one major reason is, in case of CIF transactions, we are never the recipient, and RCM is a liability as per section 9.3, as per section 5.3, casted upon the recipient of service. So please understand, dear members, the term recipient is very important. And now here we are discussing the location. For the purpose of import, supplier's location should be outside India. So the supplier's office, supplier's fixed establishment is outside, or usual place of residence is outside, and the location of recipient should be inside. Now here again, there is one more interesting point. Just listen to this carefully. Many times, sir, I am having some background voice. I request all the members to please put their mics on mute. Yeah, thank you. Now, dear members, please pay attention. Now, in relation to the same concept of import of service and this concept of location, there is another issue. Many times, for many services, we find that the person physically comes to India. Now, it may be, let us say, a doctor who is coming to India. Now, fine, I can understand healthcare is exam, but just to take a real life example, a doctor is coming to India, or many times you want some repairings done on your plant and machinery, for which the designated engineer, the designated technician comes to India. Now, when a person physically comes to India to perform a service, there is another whole challenge that comes, that whether he becomes a supplier of India, because now physically he is present in India. So whether the location of supplier is India, because if you say that, okay, now since he is physically in India, the location of supplier is in India, it can never become import of service. Here, I would like to draw your attention to one simple point. Dear members, please pay attention to this. Again, for a time being, keep this import of service concept aside. Now I'm trying to explain you the concept of location of supplier, because this is another challenge in case of import of service that I have come across in many of the litigation cases, that in your case or in your client's case, the person who is performing the service for you, who is the supplier for us, physically comes to India because the nature of service is such. Now the question over here is, if he physically comes to India, whether the location of supplier becomes India, because if it becomes India, there is no question of import, there is no question of RCM. Here I would like to draw your attention to your own service, the CA service. Let us say you all are registered practitioners from Tirupur. You are allotted a bank audit which is in Punjab. Now just think about this. This is a very common case. So you have empaneled yourself for some statutory audit, for some CNAG audit, for some insurance company audit, and you are allotted a branch which is in Punjab. Now definitely you would be going to Punjab, your staff would be going to Punjab, you would be staying there for a few number of days, and you would be completing the audit. Now tell me, dear members, our own example. You are registered in Tirupur, but since the audit assignment was allotted in Punjab and you have to physically go over there to do vouching, to do stock audit, to do verification, whether location, that is the location of supplier, becomes Punjab, whether you need to take a registration in Punjab, the answer is 100% no. Please understand this, dear members. Wherever we physically go to a place to perform a service, that place cannot be said to be your location. Because if that is the case, then everywhere I'll have to understand my case. See, I go for doing consulting, I go for doing training. This is my major profile. I personally am not involved in any compliance work that is done by my office or that is done by the respective CA. They invite me, they take me to their client's place for doing some analytical part, for doing some business restructuring part, and I physically go over there to study the company's business. I stay over there for a week's time, or whenever I'm on session, I go for 1 day, 2 days. Now tell me, I have traveled till date to 80% of the states in India. So if I'm going over there to do my consulting work, to do my training work, am I required to register in each and every place? Am I required to take that special registration called as casual taxable person registration? Answer is no. Answer is no. Because what is the location of supplier? It is the place from where the supply is made, not where the supply is made. See, there is a difference of one word. What is your location of supplier? It is the place from where supply is made. And if you are having an office in Tirpur, even though physically you are going to Punjab, even though I'm physically going to different places to carry out my activities and services, still my supply is from my office, because the first part of my service, that is the planning part, the designing part, has been done in office. Maybe after coming back, completing the audit, doing all reporting and everything, even doing further communication with the client on some audit points, maybe from my office, further follow-up is from my office. Only one part of the service, that is the execution part, was done at the client's place. That will not make the supply from any other place. The supply will still be from my office. Yes, it will be at the client's place, but at the client's place may be place of supply. That is a different point. We are still on the point of what is the location of supplier. Apply it equally or parallelly to a person who has come from outside India to India. Now, if a person has come from outside India to India for carrying out any of the work, he may be in fact an employee of the company whom you have hired. He has just come here to carry out the functions of his employer company, because you have hired the employer company and the employer company has sent him as their representative. Or second possibility, he is a freelancer and he is coming to India. We have to first find out what exactly would be treated as location. And if you look at these points, the definition of location of supplier, you will never find anywhere they have said that location is where he has given the service. First point is, if he is registered, his registered place. If not, his fixed establishment. How can India be the fixed establishment? And even in the fourth point, it is his usual place of residence. How can India be a usual place of residence? So if you analyze this, you will find that a person coming to India for some temporary work cannot be said to be having a location in India. Now, the only challenge remains that can he be termed as a NRTP, that is non-resident taxable person, that we have to analyze from case to case. But generally, if some technician is coming to India for carrying out some work, we will not say that he is even a non-resident taxable person. Still, the location of supply remains outside India. So see, this is I'm highlighting in each of these points the practical challenges, the practical points that I come across whenever such cases are posted to me. And definitely you all also would have come across one of these cases in one of your clients. So I hope whatever I'm saying, it is getting related to whatever cases you have come across. Let us proceed with the next part. Now we go to the fourth requirement of the definition, that is place of supply. Now important, since we are talking about import of services, we are talking about international transactions only. Now, what do I mean by international transactions? For this, let us understand the place of supply of provisions are given under IGST law. Under IGST law, there are two sections where you find place of supply of services. I'm not talking about goods. For goods, it is section 10 and section 11 of the IGST Act. I'm talking about services. There are two provisions. One is section 12, one is section 13. Now, most important, either you apply the provisions of section 12 for place of supply or you apply the provisions of section 13. Now, when to apply 12, when to apply 13, this is what is the deciding factor. What does section 12(1) of the IGST Act says? The provision of this section shall apply to determine the place of supply of service where location of supplier and location of service, and both these locations are in India. Now, in case of import, the definition itself requires that the location of supplier is outside. So definitely, while deciding place of supply for imported services, you can never apply section 12 because section 12 is for domestic transactions. We have to always apply the provisions of section 13. What does section 13 says? 13(1) says the provisions of this section shall apply to determine the place of supply of service where location of supplier, and it is not and, it is or the location of recipient, any one of them is inside India and the other one is outside India. So where one of the locations is outside India, in that particular case, we apply section 13 to decide place of supply. So I will simply put it in this manner. For import of service and for export of service, you have to apply section 13 of IGST Act to decide the place of supply. Now let us analyze section 13. Here I would be taking some important place of supply rules because that is the next challenge. Many times we end up paying tax under RCM, but there is no tax under RCM only because of this place of supply provision. Now recall the definition of import of service. There has to be supply. We have defined and we have checked when there will be supply in case of import of service. Then the location of supplier is outside, location of recipient is inside. Now the fourth condition we are analyzing, that the place of supply should be India. Now for place of supply, as we discussed, we are going to apply section 13. Now section 13(2) gives a general rule. When this general rule is applicable, when your transaction does not fit under section 13(3) to section 13(13). Means 13(3) to 13(13) are specific cases. If your transaction is not falling in the specific list, then you have to apply the general rule given under subsection 2. Now, with respect to our CA services, always subsection 2 is applicable. Now again, for the time being, let us keep aside import of service, because if I'm a CA in India, for me it would be an export of service if I'm providing service to an outsider. So let us understand what will be place of supply in case of our CA service. So I'll take an example first before we go to the rule. I receive a mail from one of the persons from US. He gives me his case study saying that, Vishal sir, I am intending to undertake such a transaction in India. I would like your advice, opinion on this, that what would be the GST implications. I receive the mail, I say, okay, fine, Mr. George, I am accepting your assignment and I would be charging $2,000 for my advice. He agrees to that point and I draft my opinion, I draft my reply and I send it to him. Now in this particular case, I am the supplier of service which is in India. He is the recipient of service who is outside India. The payment is in foreign exchange, so all conditions are satisfied which is necessary for export of service. Only now one condition we have to check, that for export of service, place of supply has to be outside. Like how for import it has to be inside India, for export the place of supply has to be outside. Now I will see what is the place of supply of this, my consultancy services. Now my consultancy services as a CA does not fall under subsection 3 to subsection 13. So I have to apply subsection 2. What does subsection 2 says? The place of supply of service except specified in 3 to 13 shall be the location of the recipient. And in my example, the location of my recipient is the person who is in US. So in this particular case, my service becomes export service because the location of my recipient is in US. Now here, I would like to draw your attention to some important point. Now again, in this particular case, there is a slight twist. What is the slight twist? Mr. George has put me a mail. Mr. George says ki Mr. Vishal, I am intending to enter into a transaction with Mr. Anil from Chennai, and I would like you to give your opinion about what would be the GST implication of this transaction between Mr. George and Mr. Anil. I said, fine, sir, my charges would be this much. He said, no, sir, it is agreed between me and Anil that whatever would be your consulting charges, that would be paid by Mr. Anil. And he has kept Mr. Anil in CC, and Mr. Anil has given an affirmation that, yes, Vishal, sir, whatever are your charges, I will pay it. Now I say, okay, fine, I will charge you $2,000. I still make a charge in dollars, and Mr. Anil pays me $2,000. Now here the question is whether my service would fall because of the definition of export of service. What is the definition of export of service? The export of service definition is the definition of recipient of service. What is the definition of recipient of service? Recipient is the person who is liable to pay. Now, in this particular case, even though Mr. George has hired me, Mr. George is from US, even though he has hired me, even though my report is going to go to Mr. George, I will not be giving them to Mr. Anil. My report is to be given to Mr. George, but still, this cannot be export of service, because in this example, the recipient is not Mr. George, recipient is Mr. Anil, that is a person who is liable to pay. So please understand this, that before you land up to the conclusion, before you land up in deciding place of supply or taxability or export, you have to first check who is supplier, who is the recipient. So in this example of mine, now the recipient is Mr. Anil. And if it is Mr. Anil, even though I'm receiving payment in foreign currency, even though I'm giving service to Mr. George who is outside India, still it can never be export, because my recipient is also in India. Also, I will not apply section 13 for deciding place of supply, because the recipient and the supplier both are in India. I have to apply section 12. So understand this point. So in every transaction, you have to step by step analyze. You have to see who is the recipient, and once you decide who is the recipient, then you will see the location of the recipient. Now I come back to our case. So we are deciding place of supply in case of international transactions. I go back to my original example where Mr. George has hired me, he is going to pay me, and my services of consultancy fall in the general rule. So what is the answer? The place of supply is location of recipient. However, there is an exception. The exception is where the location of recipient is not available in the ordinary course of business, then the place of supply would be the location of the supplier itself. Now let us say when I get mail from Mr. George, he is not going to give me any details of his location in the ordinary course of business. But this won't happen, because if he wants my advice, I will definitely would like to know where he is, how he is going to operate, what would be his methodology. So definitely in the ordinary course, I will be having his location. So it will be the first part of the answer, that is the location of recipient. However, let us say if for giving this advice, I do not require details of Mr. George, and he has also not shared me details. He has simply said that, Vishal sir, I want this advice. These are the details of the case, and the case is not relating to Mr. George. In this particular case, if I am not having the location of the recipient, then the place of supply would be location of supplier. And in this particular case, since the location of supplier is India, it will not be an export of service. So please understand, for being import and being export, one of the major requirements is where is place of supply. For being export, the place of supply has to be outside India. Until and unless it is export, you are not eligible for refund. Even though amount is received in foreign currency, let there be anything else. But until and unless it is the place of supply is not outside India, it will not be export. Similarly, until and unless the place of supply in India, it will never be import. You are never required to pay tax under RC. Now I go to the second part. Now from subsection 3, you have specific services. Now subsection 3 deals with two types of services. One, services on goods. Second, services on persons. Now we go to the first part of subsection 3, that is services on goods. Services on goods which are made physically available in India. So what is the example? Like your motor vehicle meets with an accident. So you require some repairing to be done. So if you require some repairing to be done, it has to be done on goods which are to be made physically available. That is, until and unless goods are available physically, nobody can do the repairing, nobody can do the touch-up, nobody can do the painting. In this particular case, the place of supply is under subsection 3. Now, the general rule under subsection 3 is location where the services are actually performed. So where the supplier is, where the recipient is immaterial. Here the place of supply is where the activity is performed on the goods where the services are actually performed. If the services are actually performed in India on the goods, then the place of supply is India. If the services are actually performed on goods outside India, then it would be the place of supply would be outside India. However, there is an exception to this rule. What is the exception? Where such services are provided from a remote location by way of electronic means. Like right now, I'm giving you this lecture through electronic means. Similarly, let us say some repairing has to be done on goods, but goods cannot come to me physically. So I say, no problem, sir. I take this particular goods like this. I will say, sir, take these goods, open, they use the screw like this, do like this. And online, I'm helping you do the service on the goods. In such cases, again, the answer is what would be the place of supply? It would be the location where the goods are. So now, even though I am helping you repair the goods, but now since the goods are not with me physically, they are with you only, you are doing the repairing through my electronic medium guidance, then it will be a place. Now the exception, I was giving you example of repairs. For repairs only, now recently there is an exception introduced which says nothing contained in this clause shall apply in respect of goods which are temporarily imported into India for repairs and are exported back after repairs without being put to any other use. Then in such cases, you have to refer to section 13.2, that is the general rule. Now understand this point. Now I take example of repairs because it is the simplest example. Your client is having a machinery. This machinery is imported from, let us say, Russia. Now this machine has developed some problem and you ask some foreigner to come, means you ask the company to send some technician to come to India and do repairing. Now in this particular case, the question would be, what would be the place of supply? Firstly, let us understand what is the location of supplier. It is Russia. Even though the person is physically coming to India, I've clarified this, the location of supply remains Russia. Location of recipient, that is your client, is India. But what is the place of supply? For this particular point, the place of supply has to be checked by 13.2, and 13.2's rule is it is the location of recipient, so it will now be India. This will become imported service. Now in this same example, let us say the technician is not coming to India. The Russian company says, sir, you have to send it to Russia and we will do the repairing over there and again we will send it back to you. In such cases, you physically send your machinery to Russia, they do repairing over there and then they send it back to you. Now here physically the repairing on your machine is happening in Russia. Still, because of this exception, you apply section 13.2. Still, the place of supply is India because as per 13.2, place of supply is the place of the recipient. We are not applying the general rule given in 13.3, that is place where the goods are. Now here the goods are in Russia for repairing. However, as per this exception, for repairing services only, the place would be the place of recipient. Now, similarly, 13.3 covers similar services performed on individual. Like here, the simplest example is that you need to get operated, and for this, the doctor comes to India. Now, here the place of supply, again, similar to goods, will be the place where services are actually performed. So, if doctor is coming to India for operating on you, then the place of supply of this service would be India, and it will become import of service. Now, services in relation to immobile property. Now, what is covered in this? In this, you cover all types of services relating to immobile property, like you cover the architect service, interior designer service, you cover the valuer service. Also, you cover the accommodation service. Also, you cover all types of services of renting, leasing, whatever is relating to immobile property, that is covered over here. Now, what is the place of supply for immobile properties? It is the location of immobile property. Now, in my original example, where I had hired the Dubai interior for doing interior works of my office, The place of supply would be India because the services are in relation to immovable property. It is of interior service of my immovable property, and the place of supply is India because as per this rule, the place of supply is the location of the immovable property. Fine. Now, event related service. Now here, in relation to event, there are broadly two possibilities. One is admission to event and one is organization of event. What is the difference? I'll give you an example. Let us say I am an event management company. You are the person, we call you as the organizers. You want to conduct A.R. Rahman sir's live concert. So you are an organizer. I am event management company. Now you want a live concert of A.R. Rahman sir. You are a person from India. I am, that is an event management company, is from Australia. Now you want A.R. Rahman sir's live concert to be held in Sydney. So you hire me, saying that, Vishal sir, I want A.R. Rahman sir's live concert in Sydney on this particular date. So I want your event management services. So we enter into a contract. Now in this particular case, let us analyze whether it will be import of service. Supplier, that is the event management companies outside India, fine. Recipient, that is you, the organizer is in India, fine. There is supply as per 7.1a because all conditions are satisfied. Now we have to only check what is the place of supply. What does 13.5 says in case of event related? The place of supply is the place where event is actually held. Now this applies to the admission service also, and this applies to the organization service also. Now our example is of organizing the event. Now in this particular case, even though A.R. Rahman sir is from India, but we are not talking about the service which A.R. Rahman sir is giving you. That is another service. And for that, there is no specific rule, so it will fall under the general rule. But since A.R. Rahman sir supplier and you recipient both are from India, you have to apply section 12 general rule. Now here, it is between you and me. I am event management company from Australia. You are the organizer from India. So one of us is outside India. We are falling in section 13. Within section 13, we are falling in specific section 13.5. So as per 13.5, the place of supply is the place where the event is held. So it will be Sydney. Now in this particular case, there is no question of RC because for you, this service is not an import service. Why it is not an import service? Because for it being an import of service, the place of supply of this service should be India. But as per 13.5, the place of supply is the place where the event is held. Now, since the event is held outside India, it will be not import of service. But I change this example. Again, I am the event management company from Sydney, Australia. You are the organizer from India, and you want A.R. Rahman sir's show to be held in Bangalore. And for this, you hire me. Now, in this particular case, supplier is from outside India, recipient is from India, and now the place of supply as per the same section would be Bangalore, that is the place where the event is actually held. And in this particular case, whatever charges I'm levying on you, there will be RCM. I hope this point is very, very clear to all. Let us proceed. Now, the issue which many of you all would be facing in case of many of your clients. I also keep on getting queries on these 2-3 cases generally. One is the immovable property, one is the general rule, and this intermediary. Section 13.8 covers services relating to banking, then services relating to intermediary, and services relating to hiring means of transport. Not transport. Transport is covered in the next subsection. It is hiring the means of transport. So if somebody wants to hire a bus, somebody wants to hire a truck as a means of transport, that is what is covered. Now we are talking about intermediary services, which are one of your major concerns. Now here I would first like to discuss something about intermediary service. Under GST law, there are two concepts. One is agent and one is intermediary. And there is a very big difference between the application of an agent and for an intermediary. Agent means a person who is performing the supply on your behalf. An intermediary is a person who is only acting as a link between the two persons. So I'll give you an example. You are your dealer of textile products. Let us say you are dealing in yarn. You are from Tirupur. Sorry, you are dealing in t-shirts, the major production in Tirupur of t-shirts. You have kept me as your consignment agent in Mumbai. Now, when you are appointing me as your consignment agent, what you will be doing? You will be sending the goods to me. I will be storing it at my place. And from Mumbai, from my place, I would be selling it to different persons in Maharashtra. In this particular case, between you and me, the relationship is of principal and agent, and this particular concept comes in the agent category, for which the rules are different. But in the same example, you appoint me as your CNF in Mumbai, not as your consignment agent, you are CNF. What is my role? You will not send goods to me. You have your own godown in Bhiwandi, in Mumbai. Your goods are kept in that godown. My role is to establish a market for you, to secure orders from you, to get you different dealers, to appoint wholesalers, and to set up your business in Maharashtra and to keep a watch. And whatever sales are happening in Maharashtra, you give me a percentage. But you do not send the goods to me. I do not store it in my godown or warehouse. Everything is done in your godown. Or I am acting as your intermediary and not an agent. So, firstly, what is the difference between agent and intermediary? Where you supply your goods to the person and the person then supplies it on your behalf to the customer, then that person is agent. But where that person is only helping you establish your business, helping you get connects, either of customer or of supplier, helping you do market survey, helping you secure orders. But you are not supplying goods to him and then he is not supplying on your behalf. This is not happening. He is just helping you do your business. Then it is an intermediary service. So let us first be clear between the difference of agent and intermediary. Because if it is intermediary, then it becomes a service. If it is agent, in the same example, then there is supply of goods, not supply of service between you and me. Because you supply to me, that is supply of goods. I further supply to customer, it is again supply of goods. But if I am acting as your CNF, I am acting as an intermediary, which becomes my service given to you. Now, in this same example, we change the example slightly, which is majorly your case or cases of your different clients, is that you have appointed me as your CNF or as your person, who, whatever name you can call me, agent or whatever, in US. My role is to secure orders for you. Or let us say you have appointed me in China. My role is to identify suppliers and help you procure goods from China. Anyways, either I'm helping you in making sales or I'm helping you in making purchases. But most importantly, you are not supplying to me and I'm not forwarding it further. I'm just helping you get the orders in US. I'm just helping you identify suppliers or doing quality assessment on your behalf in China and helping you get your raw material from China. I am not being the middle person where you supply to me, I supply further. I am not doing that role. In that particular case, I am termed as an intermediary. I am the supplier who is outside India, either in US or China. You are a recipient who is in India. So first, both these things are clear. Now we check whether there would be RCM. This is mainly your major question, the pain point. In case of intermediary, firstly, it has to be intermediary. I've explained what is intermediary and the difference between intermediary and agent. Now, once this is intermediary, I have to check what is the place of supply. As per 13.8, the place of supply is the location of supplier. It is very clear. The place of supply in this particular section is the location of the supplier. Now, who is the supplier? I am the supplier. What is my location? It is US, it is China. In this particular case, the place of supply is falling outside India. If it is falling outside India, it can never be import of service. If it is not import of service, even though you have made payment in foreign currency, there is no question of RCM. Very, very important. Please understand this. I hope this point is clear. I'm just taking a pause. I'm giving you time because I know this is one of the
Please repeat it
major
again, sir.
points. Yeah, I'll repeat, sir. I repeat, in case of intermediary services, firstly, you have to see whether the person is acting as your agent or intermediary. What is the difference? When you supply goods to the person and he supplies on your behalf, then he is agent. Generally, in case of foreigners, we don't do that. You appoint me as an intermediary in a foreign market. So I gave you an example where in one case I'm helping you do your sales, in the other case I'm helping you procure raw materials. So let us say you have appointed me in the US. My role is to secure orders for your final product. So I search for orders. I get you and the buyer in the US connected, and whatever is your transaction with the US buyer, you pay me my commission. Other way around, you appoint me as again your representative in China. My job is to procure raw material, maybe procure some machinery, procure some dies from China. I identify the supplier, I check the quality, and then I connect the supplier with you, and then whatever is the transaction between you and the supplier, you pay me commission. In all these cases, firstly, I am acting as an intermediary and not as an agent. What I am providing you is a service, not goods. Now, in this particular case, since the supplier is outside India, recipient is inside, we fall in section 13. As per 13.8, what is the place of supply? The answer is very clear. There are no exceptions. The answer is, in case of intermediary services, the place of supply is the location of the supplier. Who is the supplier? Supplier is that intermediary person who is helping you get orders or who is helping you procure your raw materials or your plant and machinery or your dies. His location is the place of supply. His location is outside India, so place of supply is outside India. And once place of supply is outside India, the transaction can never become import. And if it is not import, there is no question of RCM. I hope this is clear to everyone, because I know in our Tirupur and in major our south, we have this case or issue of intermediary services, and I keep on getting the queries that whether there will be RCM liability or not. Fine. Let us proceed. So, in case of intermediary service, I again repeat, the place of supply is the location of supplier. If the location of supplier is a foreign intermediary person, the place of supply is outside. If the place of supply is outside, it will not be import of service. If it is not import of service, there is no question of RCM. So yes, it is an expenditure debited to your P&L. You have made payment in foreign currency, but there is no need to pay tax under RCM. I know department may have a different stand, but that is their dharma to do that. But it is our role, it is our dharma to make the law clear to them. So I'm very clear about this, that if these are the facts what I have discussed with you, there is no import, there is no RCM. Fine. Then comes transportation. If it is transportation of goods, then the place of supply is the destination, that where the goods would be delivered. That is the place of supply. But if it is transportation of passenger, let us we are traveling, then the place of supply is the starting point. So see, this is the difference. In case of transportation of goods, the place of supply is the end point of transportation. In case of transportation of passenger, the place of supply is the starting point of transportation. So be clear with these. Also remember, we are talking about international transactions. The same rule is not applicable in case of domestic transaction for transportation of goods. For transportation of passenger, the rule is same, but for transportation of goods, that is for GTA, Again, I know GTA is a very big issue over there. Whether you have to pay CS or I is another challenge in case of GTA of domestic transactions, but we are not discussing that. So don't keep this in mind for domestic transactions. For international transactions, for transportation of goods, whatever freight you are paying, the place of supply will be the destination, that is where the goods are to be delivered. But for transportation of passengers, that is where you are traveling. In that particular case, the place of supply is the starting point of transportation. Further, where services are supplied on board a conveyance. Now, this won't be of much use to us. This is when you are traveling, you are in flight, you are on train, and you are served meals on the flight. This is what is the place of supply. It is the first schedule point. I'm not deliberating on this because this is of no use to us. For us, the use is the first two cases. So I repeat, for transportation of goods, the place of supply is the end point, that is the destination where the goods would be delivered. But for transportation of passengers, the place of supply is the starting point. Fine. Now, 13.3. What does 13.3 says? The central government shall have power to notify any description of service or circumstances in which place of supply shall be the place of effective use and enjoyment of service. So section 13.3 in itself has not covered any service. Rather, it has given powers to the central government to decide, okay, you decide what would be place of supply. Using this power, the central government had issued a notification number 4/2019 under the IGST, and it was effective from 1st of October 2019. Now, this basically covers one service, that is supply of research and development related services relating to the pharmaceutical sector. Now, what does this notification says? The place of supply for such service would be the location of the recipient. Now, I'll give you the simplest example of this. Now, presently, we all are seeing that many companies are getting behind getting a vaccination for this COVID. However, it so happens that there is a research laboratory which is conducting the all types of research is done in some research laboratory. It may be government, it may be private. And once there is a breakthrough, once all the phases of trials are complete and the vaccine is safe to be delivered or administered to us, then it will go into commercial production and then it will go to the pharma companies who will be taking the royalty. Everything will happen. Now here, who is the supplier, who is the recipient? The supplier is the research laboratory. That is a person who is doing research on these vaccinations. And it may be a government research laboratory, it may be a private research laboratory. Who is the recipient? The recipient is generally the pharma companies tomorrow who's going to take the patent from me. Now here, what are the conditions given under this notification? And this notification was brought in 2019, but it may be of use now. Now, what does this notification say? Basically, the purpose of this notification is to make these services export. So let us say some Indian research laboratory comes with a breakthrough. That is, they get the vaccination. And once they get the vaccination, definitely different governments, different foreign pharma companies would be behind this particular research laboratory to share with them the research results, for which definitely this laboratory would be charging some royalty. Now, for this particular service, the service of supply of research and development services by the research lab to the pharma companies or to some foreign government, what would be place of supply? The place of supply would be the recipient of service. So it will be outside India. The supplier is inside, recipient is outside, place of supply is outside. So definitely this will become export of service. And this was the intent of bringing this notification. So what is the condition? Condition one is supply located in India and recipient who is located outside. Second, such supply of service fulfill all conditions which are required in the definition of export of service except subclause 3 provided under this section. So if we satisfy these conditions, then the supply of service by the research laboratory to all foreign pharma companies or all foreign governments would qualify as export because the location would be place of recipient, that is outside India. Fine. Now we come to the next part, rather the last part of our presentation. What would be the levy of GST on such import of services, specifically under RCM. Now here I would make a comparative understanding of levy on import of goods and import of service both. So one side is import of goods, one is import of service. Now, what is the nature of supply for import of goods? As per section 7.2 of the IGST Act, in all situations of import of goods, the supply would be treated as in the course of interstate trade. That is why for all import of goods transaction, you always levy IGST. Same is the case with import of service. As per section 7.4, for all cases of import of service, the nature of supply would be treated as interstate, and again there will be IGST. So one thing is clear, in case of import of service or import of goods, we never have a challenge whether there will be CS or whether there will be I. Once it is import of service, once it is import of goods, both would be IGST. But as I mentioned, that you have to first check whether it is import of service, whether the location of supplier is outside, location of recipient is inside, and place of supplies is inside India. If all these conditions are satisfied, then only you will come to levy and decide the taxability. So first thing is clear, it is always going to be an IGST transaction. Now, second part. What does the charging provision says? This is what I was mentioning at the start. If you see the charging provisions relating to import of goods, section 7.5 of the IGST law creates a charge in normal cases, and the proviso to section 7.5, proviso to section 5.1 of the IGST Act creates a charge in case of import of goods. Now here the language is very important. What it says, provided that the integrated tax on goods imported into India shall be levied and collected in accordance with provisions of section 3 of the Customs Act. So this is what I was mentioning. The major difference between import of goods and services, the charge on import of goods, the first step itself, the charge itself is created by some other law. So GST law is not creating any charge on import of goods. It is created by the customs law. Further, what it says, on the value as determined under the said act, that is, as the valuation is also as per the customs law at the point when the duties of customs are levied. So everything, the time of supply, the valuation, the levy, everything for import of goods is decided by the customs law, and this is what I was mentioning at the start. Here nowhere the requirement is there should be a supply. So even in cases where there is import of goods where it is not satisfying the conditions of section 7 of supply, still there would be levy of import duty and the corresponding IGST, because the levy is not created by the GST law, it is created by the customs law. But in case of services, section 7.5.1, which is the general rule, read with section 5.3, which is for RCM, it says that in case of import of service, who is liable to pay? It is always the recipient. It is always the recipient who is located in India is the person who is liable to pay IGST on import of service under the reverse charge mechanism. Now here at the start itself, I have discussed at length who will be recipient. Recipient is not the person who is receiving, who is enjoying, who is availing the service. It is the person who is liable to pay. Please remember this. Many times our analysis of this also goes wrong and we end up in making wrong interpretation. So you have to check exactly who is the recipient, and the charge can shift depending upon who is liable to pay. The charge can fail. There can be no levy if the recipient is not a person from India, as I was giving you example of that George case. Fine. Next. Now the next part is, now in GST law we have, besides the basic GST, we have the compensation cess. Now as far as import of goods are concerned, compensation cess is applicable in all cases wherever you are importing luxury items or demerit goods which are covered under Compensation to States Act. However, in case of import of service, compensation cess is applicable only on one case, that is on leasing service. So major difference, for import of goods, compensation cess may apply to wide range of goods because compensation cess covers luxury and demerit goods, like it covers motor cars, it covers cold drinks, so many things. But in case of import of service, compensation cess is only on one type of service, that is leasing. Next, valuation. This is what we covered in the previous slide also. Valuation for the purpose of levying IGST on import of goods. It will be value as determined under section 14 of the customs law. plus the basic custom duty plus any other sum leviable, that is all types of safeguard duty, protective duties, etc. On this amount, you levy IGST and the compensation cess. However, what will be the situation in case of import of service? The value will be as determined under the GST law. So remember, for all cases of import of goods, you have to see the customs law. For import of service, you have to see the GST law. Now, registration. If you are an importer of goods, let us say you are not having an outward supply or your supply is below 20 lakhs, but you are importing goods. Are you required to get registered? Answer is no. See, this is a very big misconception. People people assume that in case of import of goods also there is RCM. Why? Because importer is paying import duty. I agree to this, that importer is paying import duty, but firstly, the import of goods entirely is outside the GST law. As we are discussing, it is totally covered under the customs law. Custom law is creating charge. Custom law is asking the importer to pay. It is not under RCM. And if it is not under RCM, then as importer of goods, you are not required to compulsorily register under the GST law. Because we all know that whoever is covered under RCM is compulsorily required to get registered under the GST law to pay the liability under RCM. But for import of goods, if let us say you are having no outward supply or your outward supply is below 20 lakhs, that is you are not otherwise covered under registration provision, then only for importing of goods you need not register for GST. However, all importers are required to quote GSTN in the bill of entry. Why? Because if you want to get the credit of IGST paid at the time of import of goods, you need to give your GSTN. But let us say if you are unregistered, you are not going to get the credit, then you are not required to get GST number only for importing goods. You can even give your PAN number. So let us say you are an unregistered person. Let us say, take our own example of our office. Now let us say your turnover is below 20 lakhs, so you are not required to get registered under the GST law, but you are importing some safety equipment, some COVID related ventilator or something for the purpose of your office or anything. Now for importing these items, you need not get registered under GST because import of goods is not under RCM. Let me make this point very, very clear. You are not required to get registered because you are importing goods. However, if you are importing service and you satisfy firstly all the criteria of import of service as we have been discussing, you have to compulsorily register. So let us say as a CA, same example, your turnover is below 20 lakhs, you are not required to get registered otherwise, but now you are getting a foreign consultant service for designing of your office, which was my first example. So you are getting an interior designer service from Dubai for designing your office. This is a supply, this is import of service, it satisfies all the criteria. Now for this particular import of service, irrespective of value, irrespective of your turnover, you are required to get registered because you have to discharge the liability under RCM. I hope this is clear. Next point, what about input tax credit? You are eligible to get input tax credit of both taxes paid, either on import of goods through bill of entry or either import of service through the RCM mechanism. So in case of import of goods, you discharge your IGST liability by filing bill of entry, and bill of entry becomes the basic document for getting input tax credit. In case of import of service, there is no bill of entry. You have to raise a self invoice. I hope you all remember this concept under the GST law. Wherever there is RCM and supplier is not giving you an invoice and you are required to pay tax under RCM, you have to raise a self invoice. So here, in case of import of service, you raise a self invoice and you pay the tax under RCM and you are eligible to get the credit. So from my side, these are the various points relating to taxability of imports under the GST law, specifically covering the import of service. Over to you, Chairman, sir. I am open for all types of questions and doubts of our members. If there are any, you may please put the questions to me. I would be happy to answer them. Chairman, sir. I am just in time, sir. Hello. Hello, Chairman sir.
Thank you, sir. You can ask questions to the.
Yes, sir. So, I'm open to the questions. Members may ask me the questions. Either they can unmute and ask, or they can put in the chat box, whatever is convenient to them, sir.
Sir, regarding commission paid to outside India, whether RCM is liable, sir?
Sir, generally, my general answer would be RCM should not be liable, because I understand the commission is paid in relation to intermediary services, and we have just discussed that for intermediary services, the place of supply is outside India. If it is outside India, then there will not be any, it won't come under the definition of import of service. And if it is not coming under the definition of import of service, there should be no RCM, sir.
In case of royalty, sir, royalty paid outside India.
The royalty paid outside India, see, for royalty, there is no specific provision, as we discussed. If there is no specific provision, then generally royalty would fall under the general rule, that is 13(2). And if royalty is falling under general rule, then the place of supply is the place of recipient. And once we are talking about recipient who is in India, there will be RCM, sir. Sir, I hope my answer is clear to you, sir.
Sir, okay.
Sir, I think there are five scenarios when there will be import of services. One is agency commission for procurement of export orders, as is asked by our secretary, sir. And
Right.
second is certification charges, sir.
Sir, certification for what? Certification for what?
Sir, TUV like that, sir. Some quality certification charges.
TUV, okay, certificate.
Required by, certification is required by the foreign buyer from our exporters.
Acha, foreign buyers want certification, and we get the certification done from whom?
International Certification Agency.
Company.
And for this, you provide them what details for getting the certification, sir?
Our business details are RC, partners details and business turnover and GST return.
Perfect. Again, sir, now in this particular case,
From
the
their place itself, yes, sir.
so now you are giving your business details to the foreign entity who is going to give the certificate. The foreign entity is the supplier of service, you are the recipient of service, correct? And
Yes.
again, the place of supply falls under the general rule of section 32.
Yes, sir.
Now, since we are falling under the general rule of section 13(2), that is why the place of supply would be the location of recipient. And since it is location of recipient, that is why it will be under RCM, because location of recipient means your place, that is the place which is India, and hence it would be falling under RCM.
Yeah, yes, sir. Sir, one member, Chandramouli sir, posted one.
Yeah, tell me, sir.
One query, sir. Sir, commission received in foreign currency from a person abroad for supply of goods to India, whether liable to IGST paid under reverse charge. Sir, commission received in foreign currency, sir, from a
No, so
person
now-
abroad for supply of goods to India.
No, sir, I want to understand the transaction. So our client is receiving the commission, or our client is paying the commission?
Our client is receiving the commission, sir. The goods is also coming to India, sir. Our client, what the service our client is doing this is doing some marketing services here in India on behalf of the foreign exporter.
Correct, sir. So now here,
Yes, sir.
there is no question of RCM, because now it is an income for us, na?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So now, in fact, the question is whether it would fall under the definition of export, because now our service is now this service, that is the intermediary service.
Yeah. There is a recent case law also, I think.
So if it is an intermediary service, that is our client is giving helping a foreign buyer Correct, na? Our client is helping
Yes,
a foreign supplier to get orders from India and for supply
Yes,
of
sir.
the person's goods. And the person is not supplying
yes.
goods to us. He's directly supplying the goods
Ah,
to the customer in India. Correct?
Customers. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we fall under the definition of intermediary service. And for intermediary service, the place of supply is location of supplier. Now here, unfortunately, see, firstly, there is no question of RCM because now it is an income side for us. Our client is getting the
Yes,
commission. So firstly, there is no question of RCM. But now the second question is whether for him this service will be export service. Answer is no. It will not be an export service because the place of supply is falling in India.
Yes, sir. Then IGST has to be paid, sir.
Now the question is whether IGST has to be paid. Answer is no, because sir, see in the
Yeah.
slide, the place of supply is the location of supplier. Now location of supplier and place of supply, if both are same, then it will be C plus S.
Yes, sir. And I think there will not be any refund also.
Exactly, sir. So once there is no export, there is no refund.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Members, any other questions? Sir, I have the next question, sir.
Please, sir.
Regarding machinery service, sir, that the foreign machinery supplier is sending their employees to India for service of machineries. Foreign buyer may not be having any place in India, sir, but only for repair of the machinery, he will be sending his employees. Whether ask him has to be paid, sir.
Sir, technically, now see, again here, if he is sending the employees to India for repairing, correct? Now here
Yes, sir, yes,
again, we come in the service of 13.3 will fall in, correct? What is 13.3? 13.3 is dealing with services performed on goods. Now here you see the exception part, that where the goods are coming to India for the purpose of repairs. They are temporarily imported and again they would be exported. We fall under 13.2. But here, importantly, our goods are not sent anywhere. The person is coming to India, correct? Now here, if the
Yes, sir.
person is coming to India, sir, we fall here. We fall in section 13.3 here. What does 13.3 says? The location where the services are actually performed. Now, where the services are actually performed, the services are actually performed in India. So, the place of supply of such repairing services in India. So, sir, it will be import of service and there will be RCM, sir. Hello?
Members, any other questions? Members, any other questions, members? Sir, ஏதாவது questions இருந்தா speakers ஆட்ட கேட்கலாங்க. Sir, whether sea freight paid either in case of export or import will attract RCM, sir. One of our member is asking.
Sir,
Murugesan sir is
unfortunately,
asking.
yeah. See, unfortunately, the problem is that is what we are still fighting in court. The freight paid on imports, according to me, is not liable under RCM because, as we discussed during the course of our session, that it is not satisfying the requirements of paying tax under RCM. However, presently, because of the contradictory entry, as a safer side, we are advising our clients that if you don't want to get into litigation for the time being, if you are getting the entire credit, pay the tax under RCM and get the credit. This is about import freight. When you're talking about export freight, if I'm not wrong, there is some exemption relating to freight, export freight. If there is exemption, there is no question of RCM, sir. Hello?
Yes, sir.
So
Members, any other questions?
So to conclude, there will be RCM on import freight, which I personally believe is not correct, but as a conservative view, people are paying because they are getting credit. But for export freight, there won't be any RCM.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Members, any other questions? Sir, I have two more questions regarding online advertisement, sir. Online advertisement, whether we have to pay RCM.
For online advertisement.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Means can you give me a detailed example of this, sir?
Sir, we may be posting some advertisement in Google like that, sir. For that, for which we have to pay in foreign currency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, generally, yes. Generally, yes. I hope, sir, my answer is clear.
Yeah. We are unable to receive you, sir. Please. Once
I
again,
said
sir.
yes. You have to pay, sir.
Yeah, we have to pay. Yes.
Yeah.
Similarly, for import of downloading of software, sir. Some softwares
same
like
thing.
that.
Sir, same
Zoom.
thing for software also.
We have downloaded Zoom, sir. For that, we paid in foreign currency.
Sir, but here what I understand, see, first we have to check who is the supplier. Now, if I am not wrong, many times these all companies, they have a person posted in India and we are having our agreements with that person.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
But we are making
for
in
Zoom,
foreign currency, sir.
sir, that is a different thing, but you are getting invoice from which address?
That we
If
have
I
to
am not
check.
wrong,
Yeah.
if the address is of India, there is no question of import. But yes, if the address is of a foreign person, it will be import of service, sir.
And we have to pay RCM.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Any
Members, any
other
other
questions,
questions,
sir?
members? Sir, whether it is a general rule for payment of RCM, or we have to again check it with every section
No,
of
sir.
section 13.
Yes, yes, yes. Because, sir, most important
With respect to
criteria
each
is place
service.
of supply. Yes. So for place of
With
supply, we
respect
have
to
to be very
each type of supply. Yes, sir.
correct, sir.
The only thing is, uh,
Sir, I'm
in
not
all
able
these,
to
what
hear
is the
you.
deciding? In all these, what is the deciding factor, sir?
Deciding factor means, sir,
Whether
deciding
the
factor,
education of the
sir, that's why I'm saying there is no one rule. As we discuss all the provisions of section 13, for different types of services, the place of supply is different. The most important thing is only if the place of supply falls in India, then only you are liable to pay tax under RCN. This is what we have to remember. So until and unless the place of supply falls in India, there is no question of RCM, sir.
members, any other questions to the speaker?